One man nearly conquered all of Europe. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte, and he came closer to world domination than anyone in history. In 1812, he led 600,000 men into Russia in what would become his greatest failure. But what if it hadn't been a failure? What if Napoleon had actually conquered Russia? Today, we're exploring how one victory could have changed the course of human history forever. In 1769, a child was born on the island of Corsica who would grow up to terrorize kings and reshape continents. Napoleon Bonaparte entered the world just 1 year after France had conquered his homeland. This accident of timing would forge a man who understood conquest from birth. At 16, while his peers pursued conventional paths, Napoleon graduated from military school with an extraordinary gift for strategy and an obsession with maps that bordered on the supernatural. The French Revolution erupted around him, and where others saw chaos, Napoleon saw opportunity. As the old aristocratic order collapsed, this brilliant young officer climbed over the wreckage to seize power. By 30, Napoleon had executed a masterful coup, seizing control of France itself. In 1804, he crowned himself emperor in Notre Dame Cathedral, placing the golden laurels on his own head rather than allowing the Pope to do so. The symbolism was unmistakable. Power belonged to those strong enough to take it. Napoleon's legend rested on more than ambition. He maintained 18-hour working days, required only 4 hours of sleep, and possessed a memory so precise he could recall every regiment's position across multiple battlefields. Beyond military genius, he created the Napoleonic Code, a legal framework that still influences judicial systems worldwide. His personal philosophy was simple, yet profound. Impossible is not French. Between 1796 and 1812, Napoleon didn't merely fight wars. He rewrote the map of Europe in blood and steel. His Italian campaigns established his reputation, but it was at Austerlitz in 1805 where he truly demonstrated his mastery over the art of war. December 2nd, 1805. The combined armies of Austria and Russia stretched across the Moravian countryside, confident in their superior numbers. Napoleon deliberately weakened his right flank, creating an apparent vulnerability that his enemies could not resist. When the Allied forces committed to this attack, they walked directly into a trap so perfectly orchestrated that military historians still study it today. The Battle of Austerlitz became known as the Battle of the Three Emperors, and only one emperor left the field victorious. Victory followed victory. At Jena Auerstedt in 1806, Napoleon shattered the legendary Prussian army in a single day, destroying a military institution that had dominated European warfare for generations. By 1807, he had forced most of continental Europe into his Continental System, an economic blockade designed to strangle Britain into submission. By 1812, Napoleon's empire stretched from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Baltic Sea. France directly administered Belgium, the Netherlands, and vast territories in Germany and Italy. His brothers ruled satellite kingdoms across Europe. Even Austria, through his marriage to Archduchess Marie-Louise, had been drawn into the French orbit. Napoleon's military innovations revolutionized warfare itself. He emphasized speed, concentration of force, and coordinated artillery support. More crucially, he promoted officers based on merit rather than birth, telling his soldiers, "Every man carries a marshal's baton in his knapsack." The Grande Armée represented the pinnacle of military organization, a professional force that had never known defeat. By 1812, only one power in Europe dared defy the master of the continent. Tsar Alexander I had broken the Continental System and resumed trade with Britain, undermining Napoleon's strategy to defeat his last great enemy. For Napoleon, this defiance was intolerable. He declared his intention with characteristic confidence. "In 5 years, I will be master of the world. Russia alone remains." June 24th, 1812. Napoleon led 600,000 men across the Niemen River into Russia, the largest army ever assembled in European history. His strategy was elegantly simple. Force a decisive battle early in the campaign and compel Alexander to negotiate terms. The Russians had other plans. Instead of meeting Napoleon in the kind of set-piece battle he preferred, they retreated steadily into their vast territory. They implemented a scorched earth policy, destroying everything of value as they withdrew. Napoleon's mighty army found itself advancing through an increasingly hostile wasteland, with supply lines stretching impossibly thin across 1,000 miles. The climactic battle finally came in September at Borodino. The engagement was apocalyptic, 70,000 casualties in a single day, making it one of the bloodiest battles in human history. Napoleon achieved a tactical victory, but at such enormous cost, that victory felt like defeat. On September 14th, the French entered Moscow, only to discover that the city was burning. Napoleon waited in the dying capital for 5 crucial weeks, expecting Alexander to seek terms. The Tsar refused to negotiate. On October 19th, with winter approaching like a closing fist, Napoleon finally ordered a retreat. What followed was not a military withdrawal, but a catastrophe. Russian winter, guerrilla attacks, and starvation combined to destroy the Grande Armée. Of the 600,000 men who entered Russia, fewer than 30,000 combat-effective troops survived. This disaster sent shockwaves across Europe. Every nation that had been afraid of Napoleon suddenly found courage. By 1814, a coalition had defeated him and forced his abdication. History turns on the smallest hinges. Had Napoleon begun his invasion in March rather than June, he would have gained precious months before winter. Better logistical preparation, or the death of Tsar Alexander at Borodino, could have fundamentally altered the campaign's outcome. In our alternate timeline, Napoleon captures Moscow intact in early September. Faced with the occupation of his capital and the destruction of his armies, Alexander finally agrees to negotiate. Russia becomes a French client state, and the balance of power shifts irrevocably. This victory would have immediately transformed Russia itself. Napoleon would have abolished serfdom decades before it actually occurred in 1861, liberating millions of peasants from feudal bondage. The Napoleonic Code would have replaced Russia's archaic legal system overnight. French administrative and educational structures would have accelerated Russia's development along Western European lines. The geopolitical consequences would have been staggering. With Russia under French control, Napoleon would have achieved complete European hegemony. Britain would have been utterly isolated, possessing no continental allies. This isolation might have forced British capitulation or enabled Napoleon to finally attempt his long-planned invasion of the British Isles. These changes would have cascaded globally. Without British naval support, Latin American independence movements would likely have collapsed. Nations like Argentina, Chile, Colombia, they might have stayed Spanish colonies for decades longer. The United States would have faced a fundamentally different War of 1812, potentially confronting a French-Russian alliance rather than Britain alone. A victorious Napoleon would have created a world where French culture dominated everything. French would have become the universal language of diplomacy, science, and international commerce. The Industrial Revolution might have developed differently, with Paris rather than Manchester serving as its epicenter. German nationalism would have been crushed before it could coalesce. There would have been no German Empire in 1871, no Bismarck, and consequently no path to the catastrophic conflicts that would define the 20th century. Italian unification would have proceeded under French auspices rather than through independence movements. The Ottoman Empire would likely have been partitioned between France and its remaining allies, fundamentally altering the development of the Middle East. French colonial expansion in Asia and Africa would have accelerated dramatically, potentially beginning the scramble for Africa 50 years earlier than it actually occurred. Yet sustaining such an empire would have presented unprecedented challenges. The logistical difficulties of governing territory from Portugal to Moscow would have been staggering. Economic strain from maintaining vast armies across multiple continents, emerging nationalist movements, and succession crises following Napoleon's death in 1821 would have tested the empire's foundations. The failure of Napoleon's Russian campaign was one of those moments that changed everything. His victory would have created an entirely different trajectory for human civilization, one where French cultural dominance, altered patterns of nationalism, and different paths to industrialization would have shaped our modern world. This alternate history reveals the contingent nature of historical development. The world we inhabit today was not inevitable, but emerged from countless individual decisions, environmental factors, and unforeseen circumstances. Napoleon's defeat in Russia didn't merely end his empire. It established the foundation for the international system we recognize today. When we examine contemporary world maps, we should remember that they could have been colored entirely differently. One winter, one strategic miscalculation, one emperor's overreach altered the entire course of human development. This reminds us that history is not predetermined, but contingent, shaped by forces and decisions that could have unfolded in radically different ways. Napoleon's failure in Russia didn't just change his fate, it changed ours. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.